cold outside, but all the rooms have been quite warm. Yeah, it's really, really strange. Okay, cool. Yeah, hi, I'm Chad. I'm going to be talking about mental health and how we can kind of support people with mental health issues in our software teams, which is quite useful to do because actually it turns out that you're helping yourself and you're helping kind of everybody when you implement a lot of these changes. So about me then, I'm not actually a developer anymore. I used to be a Python developer, then Ruby, then JavaScript, which is kind of the way of the world at the moment. I'm currently a master's student at York. I'm doing human-computer interaction because people are the fun and interesting problem. But I am supposed to be here. I have worked in Python. I've done like DjangoGirls. We've done DjangoGirls Sheffield for 2 years in a row now, which has been really good. And I've helped at various things. And I'm Citation on Twitter, which is at the top of this, which will be at the top of every slide. And I've also got my email address because if we don't have time for questions, you might want to email me questions later. I know it's something that people don't necessarily feel comfortable talking about straight away, or they don't want to talk about when other people might be listening or something like that. So you can always email me questions about this if you have any, or you can tweet me, or you can just follow me on Twitter anyways. So a few content warnings before we get started. This is mostly about, a lot of this comes from my own experience and John's own experience. So we're going to be talking about depression and anxiety and panic attacks a little bit because they're the kind of conditions I suffer from. I am going to be talking about ableist language. There's a slide about that, so if that distresses you, I do apologise. If people feel they need to leave the room at any time, then that's totally fine. Also, I'm not a therapist. Please do not ask me for actual kind of medical advice. It's not good for me, it's not good for you. If people want to ask me about my adventures being in therapy, I mean, that's totally fine, but I don't really want to give anybody kind of, you should take this medication type advice, because that would be bad. And it's also important to remember that all needs are different, that depression and anxiety are things I'm talking about because they're things I have, and they're really common, they're the most kind of common mental illnesses. But they're not the only mental illnesses, there are lots of different conditions and things that people have, and the way that kind of things combine with each other and interact with each other. That means all needs are different. So stuff here, you might try it out at your workplace and it might not work because actually it doesn't work for kind of certain people. Or you may try other things that I've tried and didn't work for me, but they may work for you or work for people that you know. So, yeah, just be aware of that a little bit. I did ask some people though, I did a really small survey of some kind of friends. I didn't want to put it on Twitter because I'm a bit worried about putting surveys on Twitter. But kind of some of my friends who particularly have bipolar and obsessive compulsive disorder did kind of write a few things that I hadn't thought of, which is really helpful. I'm grateful to them. So, so I don't really want to talk a lot about myself too much and my kind of like mental health story, because that's not really the kind of person that I am. But I thought before we kind of get started with some practical advice, I wanted to talk a little bit about what it's like to have mental illnesses, and especially kind of as a software developer, and kind of the issues that I have that are perhaps not tech specific, but they did crop up a lot kind of in my work. So first of all, I'm really tired all of the time. And this comes up in a couple of ways. So it's physically very tiring, partly because panic attacks are very physically tiring. A panic attack essentially is when your body thinks, or your brain thinks, that you are in kind of imminent physical danger, and you have that kind of fight or flight response where you're either going to punch somebody or you're going to run off, or both. And that's a really odd thing. You know, your whole physiology changes. You know, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure changes, you're full of adrenaline and whatever else kind of hormones and things running through your body. And you're ready to go, and I'm kind of there in this kind of ready state, and I can do that for kind of hours in a day. And to people looking from the outside, I'm just kind of sat on my keyboard like this. But like actually my entire body is really, really tensed up and ready to go, and that's quite tiring. Also, stress is a really bad physical condition to have. That mental stress causes lots of kind of physical side effects, and it's very tempting for us to go, oh, we're just going to go through a crunch period, but it's okay, it's just for a week. We're just going to do this like week of 80 hours and that's okay. But actually the kind of physical after effects of that last much longer. It's also very mentally tiring, so I like to think of it as, you may have heard things like the spoon. People talk about being spoonies and kind of spoons and spending spoons and that kind of stuff. The idea is essentially you have a finite amount of energy. And a lot of that for me is used up by my work, right? Because being a programmer or being a designer, or at the minute being a student, which I'm still kind of getting used to, takes up a lot of mental energy and takes up a lot of that kind of headspace. And then a lot of headspace is taken up by all the coping mechanisms that I have for how to stop myself having a panic attack or stop myself falling into a depressive episode. And that stuff that's kind of, these processes that are kind of always going on in the back of my head about how to cope with kind of existing. which means actually the stuff I've got left over for all the other things we do is quite small. And we actually do lots of other things as part of our jobs, right? We don't just do programming, we have to go to stand-ups, we have to go to retros, we have to talk to other human beings, we have to do pairing, we have to talk to clients, we do code reviews, we kind of do all these things that are part of our job, but they're not that kind of big programming chunk of my headspace. So I have to be very, very careful about how I plan my time, because there are consequences from all that energy runs out. Also, as you can imagine, it's very isolating. We've got this massive stigma still around mental illness, especially for people who don't have depression and anxiety, because we are starting to talk about depression, and that's lovely and that's really good. But a lot of people with kind of other disorders, did say to me, like, people don't really talk about people with OCD or people with bipolar or kind of other things. So we still have this kind of stigma. Obviously, there's a big issue in kind of men and the way that kind of men handle mental illness and kind of the things we have going on there. But the thing I found is that I already stand out in this industry. I'm queer. I'm not a man. Things about my physical appearance. And so I already feel kind of in a weak position, especially when negotiating with a new company or a new employer, or when I was very junior, for example. And so to then go and say, actually now there's this other thing that means I probably shouldn't be here, there's that whole kind of weird thing about when you stand out already, it's hard to kind of emit this extra kind of layer of something that's going on with you. And there's a difference between when I want people to leave me alone and when I really want to interact with people. So a lot of people mentioned open offices and how open offices are really bad work environments for everybody. All the offices kind of do this whole, it's all open and everyone can talk to each other all the time, but in reality that's noisy, it's distracting, it's very difficult for kind of everybody. And the way we deal with this is we put headphones on, and that's kind of great, but then if I put my headphones on I feel very isolated. So, because actually interacting with people is something that really helps me. I'm quite extroverted, so talking to other people really helps me kind of manage my kind of mood. So I have this weird thing with, like, if I have the headphones on I'm depressed because I feel very isolated. If I take it off, the noise of the office creates anxiety, and I kind of have this weird balance of kind of which illness can I cope most with today at this particular point in time. So you may see people in your office and think, oh yeah, Chad just sits in the corner with headphones on, like they're probably fine, or they're really cold and boring and don't want to talk to anybody. And it might not be that, it might just be that the only way they can cope in this really stressful environment of the open office is to put the headphones on, and that's not really ideal. And then also we have a big issue with alcohol in this industry. A lot of kind of conferences and meetups, and companies as well, like how many job adverts with the whole like free beer on Friday, do you see? Or people say, oh, you should go to this conference because like the piss up's really good. But actually, if you don't drink, then that's really difficult. A lot of people with mental health issues don't drink because it interacts with medication or it makes their conditions worse. Or lots of people don't drink for various reasons, but we still kind of have this very heavy focus on alcohol as kind of social lubricant. So again, if you don't drink, or if you don't like certain situations, if you've got social anxiety, you don't want to hang out in bars all the time or noisy places, you kind of say no to all these kind of social invitations, and again people think like, oh, that person's just really cold and antisocial. It's like, they're not, they just don't really like shouting at you in a bar with terrible music and worse drink. So I want to talk about language a little bit before we get started, this kind of ableist language. So words have meaning, it's kind of obvious, but we say phrases like this a lot, and I've heard them a lot, kind of over my career. We kind of say like, this is insane, this is batshit, who would do this? Especially when you're kind of looking at old code, or you're trying to fix a bug in a hurry, or something's going on. You're just like, oh, this is like, this person must have been crazy to do this thing. All women are mental is like an actual quote from a line manager I had in my first job, which I ended up having to leave because surprisingly I couldn't talk to him about mental health issues. So he was like, all women are crazy. I was like, okay, this isn't very helpful. Or you'd be crazy to use that framework, and this is basically, each instant in and of itself, perhaps apart from the women are mental, but each instance kind of, there's no malice behind it, and each thing by itself is okay, but if you kind of keep saying these things over and over, and if everyone in your team is saying these kind of words and phrases over and over, you generate this environment where actually I don't feel safe talking to you about mental illness, because you never say this is crazy in like a good way. I mean, you might do if you're like a surfer dude or something, like, hey, this is, this whole wicked sick thing, I don't know, I'm not a kid anymore. But no one ever looks at someone's old code and says, this is crazy, and they mean in a good way, right? People always mean it in kind of a negative way. So even if you don't do anything else, you don't take anything else from this talk, when you go back into the office on Monday, you'll stop saying these things, or Tuesday, I guess, it's Wednesday tomorrow. You'll stop saying these things, and you'll tell other people who say these things to stop it. It's very annoying. So then, some tips and advice about things. This talk is generally about how much I hate meetings, and just kind of straight up there. Actually, I don't hate meetings, I hate the way we do meetings, there's a subtle difference. So first of all, you need to be really flexible with stuff. Like you knew, we say agile a lot, we all work in an agile environment, but that we don't actually kind of act in a very agile, flexible way. We only really talk about agile in terms of software. And we need to talk about being agile and flexible and iterative in terms of process and the way we deal with each other. I really like agendas for meetings. We don't tend to do agendas for meetings anymore because we're hip and cool and we don't like doing boring things like writing stuff down. You know, the thing with an agenda though is it allows people to plan themselves. It allows me to think, okay, if I don't have a lot of energy left over, like how do I plan my energy for that meeting? It allows people to kind of look at their time and go, do I really need to be in this meeting? And the answer is usually probably not. It's also really good for things like recurring events. So an example of this then. We had a recurring calendar invitation for the retrospective. So we'd have our retro every 2 weeks on a Thursday afternoon. And one Thursday, we're about to have the retro, and I was having a really crummy day, and I really probably should have gone home. I wasn't really feeling it. But I thought, it's okay, because I could spend 2 hours complaining on post-it notes, which I quite like doing. And I can just put my post-it notes on the table, someone else can read them out, and I can just kind of sit here and absorb the meeting, and that'll be fine, and I'll be okay. What actually happened is my Scrum Master had obviously read some kind of Medium article and had decided that we were going to do a speed dating style retro, where we had to stand up and go and talk to all our other team members for like a minute about the sprint, and then we had to say which person we were most compatible with at the end. It's a lovely sound. I completely kind of freaked out at this point, and I couldn't handle it because I was not ready for that level of social interaction. And thankfully, my line manager knew about my issue, so I just kind of said to him, like, I can't do it, and I left. Which was awkward, because then I couldn't go back to the retro, and I didn't know what happened. I didn't want to go back in the office, because then if I went back to my desk, there'd be me, and then this massive empty space, because we're quite a large team, there's about 20 of us. This big empty space, and then just me sat there by myself, which would look weird. So I kind of sat outside for an hour, which is a little bit suboptimal. So allow people to do that, allow people to kind of skip or leave a meeting if they need to, and do it gracefully without you standing up and everyone going, where are you going? What are you doing? Because sometimes it is that I can't handle being here right now, so I need to pop out for 5 minutes and come back. Sometimes it's I've realised I don't need to be here and I want to do something useful with my time. You know, or people have phone calls and stuff, and people have real life things. So just fostering that atmosphere that people can come and go to meetings as they need to is really helpful. And think about other ways people can participate. You know, you don't all have to sit around a table to have a really good meeting. We used to do this kind of, you know, that Spotify guild and tribe squad type system, and there's not physically enough space for everybody in like the JavaScript tribe at Sky to go into one room. The meeting rooms aren't big enough. So we used to over hangouts even though you're in the same building, which is really helpful because it means that you can all participate in the meeting having to be there. But also if I don't feel like being in a overly warm room of people, I can still participate, you know, and that I can kind of participate on my own level. Things like anonymous retrospectives work really well, kind of especially with junior developers as well. So if you're running the retro, basically everyone emails you their comments and then you kind of read them out and you kind of facilitate that, rather than everyone having to sit around the table and go, what's wrong or what's going on. You know, I joined a team when I was in the retro on like the third day, and they asked me first, they said, well, what do you think? And I was like, I don't know, who are you? Like, that's a really, really difficult situation for anybody. You know, things like having anonymous things like having proxies. So I've had people speak for me in meetings, which is really helpful. As I said, I really want to participate, and I've got some interesting things to say, and there's more things to say, but I don't want to do that right now, can you do it for me? And especially as being like a not man in tech, occasionally I have asked men to say things for me because I know they'll be listened to and I won't, and that's unfortunate, but that does kind of work quite well if you're in that kind of atmosphere. But you know, you don't all have to be sat around talking in turn or whatever, you know, you can change up meetings, do it remotely, do it anonymously, do it through proxies, you know, do it where people can write the post-it notes, you don't have to say anything, all that kind of cool stuff. And as much as I said about flexibility, I think the one thing you have to be aware of is protecting the routine. That a lot of people said to me on survey, and I find this as well, is that the routine of the stand-up is super important, especially if you have your stand-up at the beginning of the day. Having that meeting to kind of set up your day and having that acceptable space to say that you're stuck Because it's kind of one of the only situations, or the only allowed situation you might have in your day to go, I don't know what I'm doing, or I'm stuck on this thing. But the problem with the stand-up is that when you're stressed out and when you're hitting a deadline, it's the first thing to go, because people think you're going to get a lot more done in that 10 minutes. I don't really know. But I mean, you just, because routine is the first thing to go when we're stressed, and process is the first thing to go when we're stressed. And it shouldn't be. It's much more important to stick to your process and stick to your routine when you're stressed. So especially for me, I really like the routine. So I don't like people cancelling things at the last minute, you know, that kind of stuff. Because if you plan a load of energy and go, I'm going to have this meeting, it's very difficult, and plan that energy, and then someone cancels it right at the last minute, that stuff kind of hangs around in your head and has nowhere to go. I don't know if anyone's had that experience. You know, like I'll have this after the talk because my head's been full of this talk for days, especially like being last. And then I'll finish it, and then all that headspace has got nowhere to go for a bit, and I'll spend like, you know, half an hour going, you know, and people do that after big events and stuff, so protect the routine. And just think about energy, that it's a resource you have to manage. And it's not the same as managing time, that you can be in a long meeting that doesn't take a lot of energy, you can be in a short meeting that takes a lot of energy. So when you're planning meetings for other people, or organising meetings or whatever, you need to think about energy being an extra resource you need to think about that's not the same as time. I mean, it does correlate quite well, but it's not the same as time, you know. People might have, especially kind of management, I guess, when you're kind of stuck in that management role of being in meetings all the time, you know. But they might not need to be in all of them, or, you know, they might be, you know, if I'm leading a meeting, that's very different from me just being in a meeting, so you kind of need to think about that and what people are doing. Reality is broken, and what I kind of mean by this is that I am not responding to situations in a way that is appropriate or normal, or I'm not really sure the best way to explain it, but like I said, anxiety is when my brain is saying, you are in like imminent physical danger. I've never been in imminent physical danger in a tech office, right? Like, that doesn't really happen. Like, I'm generally quite safe, sat at my desk in my office. My brain doesn't think that. That's how it goes. You know, in the same way depression, you know, it's your brain telling you that you shouldn't be here, that you know, something's wrong with you, that nobody likes you, that you can't do what you do. Of course I can do all those things, but I just have that perception of reality that's not quite right. And also with anxiety, so one of the ways that my anxiety also works is this idea of like disassociation, where a brain will go, we're so stressed out and we're in so much danger, I'm just going to cut the conscious brain off completely. And so I can physically be in a meeting but mentally not be there at all. And people don't know that from looking from the outside, so I don't kind of go into the meeting and say that because that's strange, or I'm not really aware of it until afterwards or whatever. So writing down what happens in a meeting is really, really helpful. Again, minutes and agendas and all those things, they're just really, really helpful. You don't have to do them in a very formal way, but if you've ever, so I also only work 4 days, so I would take Fridays off to kind of help me kind of, you know, with the mental health stuff. And then I come in on Monday and say what happened on Friday, and nobody can remember. It's been the weekend, people have been to bed, people have been out, people have not been at work for 2 days, and so you come in, and people go, oh, nothing important happened. And then a week later, someone will be like, oh yeah, we're making that major change we talked about last Friday. And then that's really off-putting, because then it makes me more aware that I'm not fitting in with the rest of the team, because they will know something that I don't. So if you write that down before you go home or whatever, it really helps people coming back into the meeting later or back into the team later to go, aha, we did decide to like move our entire stack to React on Friday. That was a great idea. You know, like why am I still plugging away at Angular? Which is always a really good question to ask yourself. The other thing is that actually human interaction is quite difficult. Human interaction is quite difficult. Things like code reviews, I kind of have a weird love-hate with code reviews. I get why we have code reviews, you know, and that's always really useful, and kind of when we've done stuff around, you know, things like PCI compliance, code reviews are really important, really valuable, and you have to do them. However, we tend to do them basically via text. Didn't put the slide back in. We do them basically via text, so if you see like GitHub's, you know, that's the way you can do code reviews and stuff. Textual communication, it's really, really hard to get context. It's really hard to understand the mood or what the other person in that review is saying, especially if you're junior, but also especially if you're struggling to understand context anyway. That people can kind of say things that are sarcastic or mean, or, you know, and it might actually be that that's just their personality, that's just the way that they are, you know. And you kind of go, this thing that you said was quite strange, and I go, oh, I'm really sorry, that's just kind of how I am, you know. I tend to be a bit sarcastic in code reviews, for example. But it's really difficult to get that context, and the way we've dealt with this as an industry, very poorly, is to have code review guidelines where you say, they're good, right? So you have, this is the expected behaviour of the reviewer, the expected behaviour of the reviewee. However, we really like this sentence of don't take it personally, but you see this in a lot of code review guidelines. You may see it as the reviewers of the code, not of you. This used to be in the Thoughtbox guidelines, but then I did this talk at AutoConf, and they were like, oh, right, cool, we'll change it. They changed it, made it worse, but you know, they tried. But the problem with this is that the review is always of me, because the code is a value add to the company, especially if someone's reviewing my code who I don't know. So if I'm inputting into another team, for example, the code reviewer might be someone who's never met me before. They don't know me at all. So the only way they know me is through this piece of code I've written. So I've never really liked that piece of advice. But don't take it personally. It puts the emphasis on the person being reviewed. No one has ever gone up to somebody and said, the thing you said to me was mean, it was out of order. And they say, don't take it personally, and you go, oh, okay then. But that's never happened. That never happens. And it just makes it kind of awkward, and I don't like it. And kind of the way to do code reviews, and the way that's worked best for me, is to do code reviews together. So either like sat next to each other, or kind of over things like Screen Hero now. We've got really cool tools. We've got things like Slack, we've got Screen Hero, we've got Hangouts, we've got whatever other tools kind of people are making at the moment. That you can do code stuff together, even if you're remote. And then when you talk to another human being, you get context, because we get a lot of context from tone and facial expression and stuff like that. You know, that's how we've kind of evolved to communicate. We're very visual communicators. And so if you kind of do that, then you'll remember that the other person I'm talking to is a human being. You can get instant clarification. You know, people are less likely to insult you, that kind of stuff. And that's always really helpful. What are the things you can do as a company then? I get that many of you may not be in the position to do this, but go and yell at your HR people anyway. Mental health sick days are really, really useful. So my last company, they did that. So if I was off sick, I could say I'm off sick with depression. And the reason that's helpful is because it gives you that permission to be off sick. It gives me that permission to come in the morning or get halfway through the day and go, I'm not mentally well enough to be here. And then that's okay, and everybody gets that. Whereas before, I would lie and say I've got a migraine, or I'm feeling like sick or something, like, oh, I was totally throwing up all morning. But then the time off I have isn't very useful, because I spend the whole time off worrying that I'm going to get caught, or, you know, that, you know, and I don't like lying to people, because lying to people feels bad. So having that kind of a permission to go, it's okay to feel too anxious or too depressed or too whatever to come into work is really, really valuable. It makes that time you take off actually quite restful and useful. Get a mental health first aider. So you have a physical first aider, so if you like cut yourself on something, which doesn't really happen a lot in the tech industry, I guess, someone will put a plaster on it for you, and that's very nice of them. Getting someone to do that for mental health, again, is very useful. It has that person when I'm having a panic attack I know I can talk to. Because I don't know if I can talk to other people in my team about it, because they might not be in a headspace that they're going to be very good for me. You know, they might want to help but can't, or they might look at me and go, what's wrong with, you know, like, people may not know how to react to you. And having a person in your company, you can go, this person will know how to react. Lots of people kind of have their own kind of things like crisis plans and stuff, like you'll learn like when to call the emergency services, for example, like when to call external help, that kind of stuff. That's really useful. Train your managers. Tell your managers if they say stuff like all women are mental, that they will get fired. That's a good thing to do, but train your managers, because people will come up to them, you know, the reports will come up to them and say, actually, I've got these mental issues that get me over my work, how can we help? How can you help me? How can we work with this? How can we work around this? That's really good. Rethink this open office, bums on seats, 9 to 5 culture. It's not working. None of us think it's working. It's not just a mental health thing, right? Lots of people hate the open office. Lots of people hate being in the office 9 to 5. You know, we all have different ways of working. We all have different times in the day when we're kind of, our brains are active and useful. You know, think about doing better remote working. Think about the ways you communicate. You know, think about the ways you do meetings, that kind of stuff. And mix up your social events. It doesn't matter if some of your social events are at the pub if the other ones are not at the pub, right? If you mix it up. So if I can only go to half the social events, you'll at least know that I'm a sociable person. Because like I said, I'm an extrovert, I like going out, I like talking to people. Mix it up, you know, go for lunch or work outside. We had a retro outside and it was amazing. You know, but it has to be a nice day, which I know kind of limits it quite badly, but being able to do that, just get out of the office and do that kind of meeting, or, you know, if you're doing some kind of design or beginning of a project, being able to do that outside in the sunshine is really, really lovely. So just the last slide then, take a photo of this. This is just some resources that are really helpful. So open sourcing mental health, the guy, I can't remember his name, he's Funkatron on Twitter, because that's how I remember people now, by the Twitter handles. Does a load of talks on this. It's very American focused, but the kind of general principle still applies. Mind, obviously the UK mental health charity, so they don't particularly deal with tech, but they'll deal with kind of things in general. Especially if you kind of need advice, like legal advice, that kind of stuff, local Mind and all that, they're really, really lovely. Mental health first aid, that's the English one. We can get training if you're an English company. There's one for Scotland and Holland. I think it might have come from the Netherlands, I'm not quite sure, but different countries have them. Then Geek Mental Health Week, who are a very small organisation in the UK that for a week every year has just finished. They do like blog posts and events and stuff around mental health and tech. I've done blog posts and stuff for them before, and it's really, really good, so check it out. Thank you.